Hey there! So, part one of this three-part docu-commentary, I guess, was exploring the lead-up to me actually creating the cartoons. This part is more about the cartoons themselves, or at least Series 1 and 2, specifically. Series 3 will be in Part 3. And the style of this video is going to be a bit different. Instead of me just sitting in front of a camera and telling you, it's going to be more like sort of a half commentary-ish type thing, with the episode like playing on screen as well. Not the whole thing. I'm not going to commentate through the entire episodes. Jesus, that video would be way too long. But it's sort of just me sitting there explaining the creative process behind each particular cartoon. So yeah, without further ado, take it away, webcam Will. You can tell this bit's unscripted, can't you? So, the very first cartoon, The Adventures Begin. I needed an idea for a series opener, and so I consulted my previously mentioned comic book to see if there was any idea I'd previously developed which I could adapt for a debut installment. And I found a cool gem of an idea in a comic I had previously created for my friends. Because at one point, Adam, Holly and I make a cameo running through my friend's shenanigans, where we're being chased by, zombie Nazis. Yeah, you can see what I mean about some of my friends suggesting insensitive, edgy stuff now, don't you? Basically, I want to extrapolate the idea of a chase into a full cartoon, but, you know, with a different thing chasing us. And at first I struggled because a lot of what I was coming up with was just lame. But eventually I just landed on a bull. And something about that premise just clicked, you know? So I wrote the script. I got Adam and Holly together with me to record the dialogue, and the animation process took about 9 days in total. And after that, The Adventures Begin, as we know it, was born. I am still rather fond of the cartoon's humble beginnings, despite how clearly primitive every aspect is. I do think the premise could have been expanded on a bit more. Like, I could have had a few more exciting set pieces of the bull chasing Will and Adam through the town and causing havoc. And I also think Holly could have had a bit more prominence, because I deliberately left her out of the action so she could be the instigator of the resolution. Well, the Deus Ex Machina, to be more real, let's be honest. But that ultimately came at the expense of her presence in the opening episode of the series. So, you know, to have a main character shafted like that in the first episode, I probably could have done better, but you know, it was the first one. Things are bound to be a bit rough around the edges, so I can forgive it. It's cute. It holds a special place in my heart. So next up is Slendy Phillip. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. Just from the title alone, you can tell exactly when this cartoon was made, because the Slender Man craze, like, yeah, who even remembers it at this point? So, the fact that I did a Slender Man parody as the second episode of my cartoon series, that hasn't aged well at all. But it wasn't just a Slender parody for the sake of a Slender parody, because this was an understated way of trying to involve, or rather reference, one of my secondary school friends. Because, you see, one of my friends at secondary school was this guy called Philip, who I'd known since primary school, and I was very fond of him. And our friendship group would have this running joke with him because he was pretty damn tall. Like, I'm pretty certain he was the tallest in our entire year at one point. And he was also rather reclusive and quiet. Like, he would often choose not to talk to people if he wasn't on good terms with them. And he also always wore his school clothes impeccably. So, a tall guy in a suit who doesn't talk. Kind of like Slender Man, right? You know, you can, hence Slendy Phillip as a character even being a thing. And yes, Slendy's hairstyle is a reference to Philip because his hair was kind of like that. Maybe it still is, I don't know, I haven't caught up with him in a while. Now, granted, I didn't convey this well at all in the cartoon itself, because it's straight up a Slender parody, where it turns out Slender Man is just misunderstood and wants friends, and the Maddox is just like, yeah, let's call him Slendy Phillip, without explaining why they came up with that name. If I had started developing Maddox and Friends at any other time, this episode and Slendy Phillip as a character probably wouldn't even exist, or would be radically, unrecognisably different. But I'm still kind of fond of it, and Slendy Phillip is too deeply entrenched in the DNA of Maddox and Friends for me to just outright stop including him. But yeah, I imagine he's one of the most confusing elements to newcomers of my cartoons, and it's why I've begun trying to phase him into the background a bit. Like, not get rid of him, just have him be more of a background presence, because in a lot of the earlier cartoons, he was like hanging around with the Maddoxes a lot, even in situations where the other friends weren't there. But still, I was clearly onto something after these first two cartoons, because people at my school were really impressed with them. The school website even hosted them for a while, and hell, I was even featured in my town's local tabloid for these two awkward early attempts at animation. And all these things, they melted my heart. I was really happy. So naturally, of course, I decided to press on. Runaway Pets and Benji Finds Love are relatively straightforward. So, early Maddox and Friends went through a period of being very pet-focused, because I just loved my real-life pets at the time. Misty was the family cat, and Benji was my rabbit. I love them both dearly, and I conceived a wacky scenario where they were scared into running away and the Maddoxes had to find them. And it was also a backdoor way for more of my friends to be introduced to the series. Oh, George isn't actually a hippie in real life, for the record. I just made him like that in my series because I always perceived him as a chill, cool guy, and for some reason my 15-year-old mentality associated that with being a hippie for some reason. So that's what he became in my world, but hey, he didn't object. The production process was a little different this time around, because for The Adventures of Bean and Slendy Phillip, I was able to get everyone together in the same room to record their lines in one session. And both cartoons took like 9 days to animate each. But in Runaway Pets' case, almost everyone recorded their lines individually because, you know, scheduling. And the animation took 2 weeks, so the process wasn't as ideal as the previous installments. Benji Finds Love, meanwhile, was a last-minute replacement for another idea I had for this slot, but more on that later. While I was trying to think of something else to fill this slot, in real life we got a second rabbit called Bam Bam to keep Benji company. And I loved her a lot as well. And that inspired me to quickly dash out a cartoony version of these events. But only Adam was available to record for this period of time, and the animation took just under a week to finish, about 6 days if I remember rightly. If I were to redo Maddox and Friends nowadays, I think I'd end up combining these two ideas into the same episode. So like, while Benji's on the run, he meets Bam Bam and they both fall in love, and then when the Maddoxes find him, they also take Bam Bam under their wing, you know, something like that. Because on its own, Benji Finds Love does kind of feel awkward and inconsequential compared to the rest. Like, it does feel a bit like it feels a bit like it would be a B plot which would slot into one of the others, if you know what I mean. Especially since it doesn't have any conflict. But, you know, early days. I've got to figure this stuff out, you know? Alright, so... The Phlegm Duck. Where do I even start with this one? So, this cartoon emerged from an in-joke in my friendship group. Because we'd often, you know, meme each other's quirks. And this one guy in our group was known for frequently phlegming. Like, he just spit on the floor of the playground at random intervals, and that just stuck. Like, we just would constantly focus on that. I don't know why. And during a PE lesson, 2 of the other guys in our group were playing football or something like that. And in an attempt to tackle for the ball, one of them apparently made a strange duck-like noise, and the other guy never let him live it down. But yeah, both of these friend group memes, I don't know how, but they ended up getting combined into this one entity, this Phlegm Duck. where phlegm was misspelled because I was dumb and didn't think to look up the correct spelling. And I think the cherry on top was that there used to be an app on the App Store, which has long since been removed now. I've tried looking it up, I can't find it. Called Songify, which you could use to record yourself saying, well, anything really, and then select an accompanying instrumental music track. And the app would then auto-tune your recording to the melody of the song. And so one day we were just goofing around with the app, and one of us had the bright idea to say, phlegm duck phlegm into this software. Like, we'd sort of developed this voice for the character at this point. And we put it to this mellow beat, which for the record is called Double Rainbow. And it fits so distressingly well and sort of transformed our phlegm duck character into this downtrodden, unfortunate creature akin to like Hans Moleman from The Simpsons or something. And, so I included him in my old comic book quite a few times, actually. But when I actually got around to making the cartoons, I wanted to actually do him justice and make an actual episode dedicated to him. And yes, that Songify song that I was talking about a minute ago, it is the music track that plays during the episode, the phlegm duck phlegm. So that was a fun inclusion. As for the production side of things, I can't remember exactly how long this cartoon took to make, but I do recall the rain effect being incredibly inconvenient to animate, which is why the frame rate is so atrocious in the outdoor shots. And that's part of the reason why I decided to reanimate a segment of that cartoon around 6 years later, where I think I did a much better job. You can check that out. I'll put it on the screen there. But yeah, that is the story of the phlegm duck. Crazy Asylum. It was the first and so far the only episode of Maddox and Friends to have been substantially written by another person in addition to myself. As one of my friends at the time, Ben, he was really enthusiastic about my art and the narratives I'd create, and he wanted to co-write an episode with me. Coincidentally, the same episode which introduced him as a character to the series as well. Problem is, Ben was also notoriously unreliable, and it was extremely difficult to actually get him to write his parts of the scripts, let alone getting him to actually record his dialogue for it as well as in the future episodes. Like, at the time, I wanted Maddox and Friends to have this, like, one cartoon a month kind of schedule. And I was keeping that up to, like, the phlegm duck. But Ben slacking off meant that Crazy Asylum came out 3 whole months after the phlegm duck, so it kind of ruined my schedule I wanted to have. But yeah, I think you can sort of tell that I wasn't the only one scripting this episode, because comparatively it's probably the darkest of all the Maddox and Friends cartoons, at least conceptually. Like, it's set in an insane asylum overseen by a woman who is severely violating some human rights up here. Like, yeah, Ben was one of those friends who would often suggest the edgiest stuff for me to include in my comics, and Crazy Asylum is the one instance where he did that for the cartoons as well. Oh, and he was also a brony, hence the whole pony transformation at the end. I can't remember the amount of time it took for me to animate, but it was published a couple of days prior to Doctor Who's 50th anniversary, so I think I might have rushed it a little to get it out quickly beforehand, and honestly I think I just put a bit more time into it because I think the animation itself is probably one of the weakest of all the ones I've done, and the plot could have been tweaked here and there. Like, it doesn't really make much sense when you stop and think about it. But hey ho, that's Crazy Asylum. The boring educational episode, it's a personal favourite of mine purely for the fact that I actually got my secondary school head teacher to be the villain in it. Like, he agreed to voice act and star as himself, and it was a glorious experience. Unfortunately, I kind of feel like it's one of the weakest in terms of actual animation. Like, there's a lot of shots of characters just standing there blankly talking. But I still have a soft spot for it regardless. I think it took a couple of weeks to animate. I can't remember the specifics, but I did have to wait for the head teacher to approve before I was allowed to publicly post it, which, that's fair enough. There was also originally a subplot about one of the friends, I won't say who to save them the embarrassment, getting a girlfriend played by their real-life girlfriend. But this plot thread was excised when they broke up in real life. And you know what, the cartoons are probably better for it, honestly. And it would have been a bit cringe. Let's just say that. Oh the Youth Today was the last major cartoon to have been animated on my laptop. Because after finishing work on this one, I received an actual proper computer for my 16th birthday, which I'm still using to this day. So, how about that? Oh the Youth Today was actually inspired by a real event that happened in my life, sort of. Adam, Holly and I visited a garden centre which also had this aquarium section in it. And while we were browsing, there was some commotion about a fish flopping about on the floor. And there were these two older teen boys in the vicinity who were acting really dodgy about it. When one of the aquarium staff turned up to rescue the fish, it was still alive, for the record. Those two teen boys tried accusing us of taking the fish out of its tank and stamping on it. But, in real life, the staff man disbelieved them and shrugged off the whole affair. But, so we didn't actually get banned for life, as I depicted in the cartoon. But, it's fun to exaggerate these things. And, making this episode was some kind of cathartic, sweet revenge on them for my younger self, who found it hard to channel his anger. I think it took somewhere between 6 to 8 days to animate. I can't remember. And this was also the first cartoon since Lenny Phillips to feature just be Adam and Holly voice acting. Again, I know there was a limited cast for Benji Finds Love as well, but Holly wasn't actually present for that one. This was the first one to feature us as a trio and just us since Lenny Phillips. So, the more you know. I don't know. On to the race. So I vaguely gestured to the idea of a racing adventure in my comic book, and by the time of the cartoons, I had workshopped it into a jet engine go-kart affair. I think it took like 2 or 3 weeks to animate, as it had some particularly ambitious segments in it, like the blurry, speedy effect when the karts are zooming along the landscape and stuff. And of course, it was a backdoor way for me to introduce more friends to the series, and Beth, which is a little awkward in retrospect, considering personal family matters have led to us not talking for the last 4 or 5 years. Why I put her in New York, I can't remember, but she is a semi-popular artist in real life, so that's acknowledged in the cartoon. As is one of her real-life friends, Pascal, who I actually got to voice herself and improvise her dialogue. Oh, and Connor has a llama in this because he just had a fascination with alpacas, like, in real life, so that's there. If I were to redo this cartoon now in my current personal situation, the whole New York subplot would undeniably be radically different. Like, maybe it'd be a Universals in Scotland type affair instead, because, no Beth. That's all I'll say. But regardless, I don't regret making this cartoon. I still think it holds up despite the awkwardness. But anyway, Series 1 closes off with Naught on Your Side. This particular cartoon also started life in my comic book, with a similar premise. There is this other group of people making life hard for Maddox and Friends, and this smug, shifty, posh guy with a name that screams "Don't trust me" promises to help our characters out, but is secretly a double agent because he just wants to watch the world burn, I guess. I don't know. Hell, I even ripped some dialogue straight from the original comic, so clearly I was proud of this idea. Again, I can't remember the amount of time I spent animating this one. Like, a lot of these time frames have slipped my mind over the years. It may have been a couple of weeks again, just like the others. But this cartoon did get a little marred by real life issues though, because at the time, me and some of the friends were having a temporary fallout, and it was hard to tell at that point if we'd ever patch things up. And the original script of Naught on Your Side involved the friends in the main action getting beaten up by the thugs with the Maddoxes and stuff. But in the light of this fallout, I drastically decreased their roles to, you know, Deus Ex Machina. Hey, I needed some form of resolution. But me and those friends ended up being hunky-dory after that anyways, hence why they kept appearing in the future cartoons. But that subplot of them being in America is ongoing from this point, so, you know. There we go. That's the story behind Maddox and Friends Series 1. There was going to be another cartoon somewhere in there called A Stupid Mistake with an American TV station. And it would have involved the Maddoxes, you know, going over to America and starring in a TV show, which they end up regretting. But that idea just sounded like a redundant combination of the boring educational episode and the race, so I ultimately abandoned it for one of the other cartoons. I think it was Oh the Youth Today. So from the very beginning, I always had the goal of Maddox and Friends Series 1 to be 10 episodes, and with that vision achieved, I hope to reach it again with Series 2. And sadly, I didn't quite manage it, did I? I definitely had much more daring goals with Maddox and Friends Series 2. Since one of my passions is astronomy and outer space in general, it was always kind of a desire for me to do an alien-themed cartoon at some point. I'd frequently daydream or even doodle an epic, grand-scale alien invasion of Earth type scenario with Maddox and Friends. But I also had the good sense to know that that would have been way, way too ambitious for me to even attempt at that point in time with the resources I had. But I did want to do something alien-themed, so enter an alien encounter. I actually formulated this particular cartoon as part of an art class project in secondary school. I mean, I even still have the art book where I drew a lot of the concept art and storyboards and stuff, so isn't that interesting? At this point, it was easily the most ambitious cartoon I had created. I think it took at least a month to make, with the first couple of minutes in particular, up to Grettar's first speaking line, being done over 3 consecutive school days, as this episode was partially animated as an exam piece. The main characters had, you know, tweaked more detailed designs. The runtime was far longer, upwards to 10 minutes, I think it is, which means a longer script, more frames to create in total, and, you know, so on. I'm honestly still really proud of the sound design that I did on the aliens' voices. I think I made them sound quite ominous and intimidating. And of course, the cartoon ends with an ominous... ominous? Can't talk. An ominous open ending, which hints at a potential return for the aliens in the future. So, the door is still open for an alien invasion of Earth story. Will I ever capitalize on it? I don't know. I do think at this point, though, I had hit the peak of my creativity as far as the original Maddox and Friends production timeline is concerned. Because after this episode, my time at secondary school ended, and with that shift in my life, I started to feel this passion project slipping from my grasp. But, you know, it wasn't over yet. Next is The Granny Who Didn't Shut Up. Another installment, very loosely based on a real event again, where Adam, Holly and I entered a charity shop in my town one day, and some old woman just started talking to Adam out of the blue about whether he had cuddly toys as a kid, and it was pretty funny at the time. And so I extrapolated this premise into a fully exaggerated scenario where this old woman creates a space loop which traps anyone she engages in conversation with. This one was also pretty ambitious, because I recall having a really difficult time with Windows Movie Maker with this one, because I remember like making a Facebook post about it, and apparently it took like 8 hours to render or something. Like it was a trial and error process. Like, oh god, I kind of remember the stress of that day. It's a really lengthy one too, because until 2021, the year I'm filming this, it was the longest animation I had ever made. And as of 2021, it's also the last cartoon in which all of the major Maddox and Friends cast specifically contributed their voices to. So that's a shame. I think it took a couple of months to animate overall. So, the idea for How the Slendy Phillips Stole Christmas came about because I was becoming increasingly more aware that of all the cartoons I had made so far, Slendy Phillip was the only one which was a conscious parody of another work. And this fact compelled me to make another parody episode, although this time it's based on a more timeless property. Plus it's a Christmas special, and I guess every cartoon show needs that, or something, I don't know. It was somewhat easier to develop, simply because I was the one major contributing voice actor, with the others just having tiny cameos. So that meant, like, arranging their recording availability was less of a hassle and stuff. I think it took less than 3 weeks to make overall, this cartoon. Like, the animation bit, anyway. Because I remember finishing it stupidly early as well, because I think I started working on it in early November out of fear of having a strict deadline, and then I finished it in the same month, and I had to wait to post it in December, like, or just at the beginning of December, like halfway through December, where it's more appropriate. But yeah, that was amusing. But yeah, this is also the only cartoon to not have a specific rhyme time segment, and that's because, I mean, all of the narration is in rhyme, so it'd be redundant. So yeah, do you want the ding going off all the time? So now, we come to Loud, 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 the unintentional finale of the original Maddox and Friends lineup. I remember becoming a bit dissatisfied with how my animations were still a bit choppy in the frame rate around this point in time. So with this cartoon, my mission statement was to put a lot more effort and attention to detail into the smoothness of the character motion, which naturally ate up so many more frames, and, you know, greatly increased the production time, and it really pushed Windows Movie Maker to its limits and beyond. I remember starting work on this one within a couple of weeks of 2015 beginning, and then I finished it on my birthday of the same year, which is April 2nd. So this was by far the lengthiest and most exhausting production of a cartoon up to this point. Adam had also bailed out of recording for this cartoon, and I had none of the friends in mind for the script anyway. Meaning it was essentially just a two-hander between me and Holly, with a couple of out-of-context archive clips to cover Adam's absence. But what's interesting is that I had originally planned for this cartoon to come way earlier in the show's history, because the slot which eventually became Benji Finds Love was originally intended for this episode, but I scrapped it at the time because I thought it was just way too ambitious for my resources back then, and I couldn't have been way more correct, because, oh my god, I dare say it was still too ambitious for the time when I actually made it, Jesus. But while I was, and still am, very proud of the results, I was also severely burnt out by about the halfway point of the production, to the point where I did something I regret. I excised some plot material to meet a deadline, because Loud Loud Loud's resolution was originally going to be a bit more grandiose, because upon stopping the DJ's music, Will and Holly would have, like, berated them They would have shouted at them a bit and then dropped an anvil on them. And the force of that anvil would have caused the DJ's house to collapse, and the force of the DJ's house collapsing would have caused the rest of the already structurally weak town to collapse on top of that. So it would have been quite a cinematic scene. In my mind's eye, I imagine I would have been able to realise it fine enough back then. But at that point, I've been working on the cartoon for like the 4th month in a row, and I just wanted it to be done. So I saw an opportune moment to cut it short, and I pulled the plug. And that's why the ending is so abrupt. And in retrospect, yeah, maybe the whole town collapsing would have been a bit too ambitious, but I could have at least kept like Will and Holly shouting at the DJs as I'd originally planned, just to give it that personal, cathartic touch. But I guess when you're creatively exhausted, you just don't think about that stuff, and you're instead just longing to be done. So, yeah, that's how the episode ended up. And that is the unintentional end of Maddox and Friends Series 2. I definitely had other ideas for future cartoons, a lot of them in varying stages of production. Some were just in the writing stage, but the next one in particular was going to be called The Alternate Machine, where Holly creates a machine which makes off-brand clones of whatever it comes into contact with, and then shenanigans ensue when the alternates of people turn out to be evil. I had fully written this one, and the friends had even recorded their dialogue for it, and I was developing animated assets for it and everything. But because I was so burned out by Loud Loud Loud, as well as other events happening in my life, which I'll elaborate on later, I just kept putting this one off, and ultimately it just never got made. And honestly, the longer I left it, the more I began to dislike the concept, especially since the friends had taken some creative liberties and voiced their alternates with impressions of pop culture characters like Shrek and Starscream. And that just became more and more dated and cringy the longer I slept on it. So in the end, I don't think that episode will ever see the light of day. Nor will Enter the Masquerade, a story where Beth and Pascal, already can't be done, would have hosted a masquerade party which the Maddoxes and their friends would have attended. Or another idea, Countdown, which would have had the Maddoxes compete in a game of Countdown, I guess. I don't know, I never really fleshed it out. These episodes got stuck in limbo. Never mind Enter the Masquerade, because now we enter the Maddox and Friends hiatus.